I saw tracers coming up off my flight leader's tail. They missed him and hit me. Then the right rudder pedal cable went limp. When that happened, I knew I had to get out of that airplane very quickly. And I turned back to make sure I was clear of the airplane and pulled the ripcord and floated down and watched my plane spin down and explode. Sad, brand new P-51. Only probably had about 40 hours on it. My name is Jim Frolking. I was a first lieutenant in the Army Air Corps in World War II. I enlisted when I turned 18 in April of '42 in the aviation cadet program. I'd never been up in an airplane before in my life until the first day I went up with my instructor. I didn't know what to expect, whether I would get airsick, which I didn't, fortunately. Had a wonderful flight instructor. He was a civilian from Ohio, and it just worked out fine. It was a great, thrilling experience. It appealed to me.
The wings I'm about to pin on you will designate you from this day henceforth as men of the sky.
Graduated from flight school in November '43 as a second lieutenant, fighter pilot. Came home for a leave and then went back out to California for operational training, Long Beach area, California, and to a P-38 base down there, and flew there for a couple of months before we went overseas in April of 1944. We weren't assigned to our groups yet, but we were at this base, I forget the name of it, in central England. Flew some training missions there for a week or so, and I was assigned to the 436 Fighter Squadron. They were the last fighter group to be organized in 1944 in the 8th Air Force.
American fighter planes based in England, operating in the skies of Western Europe against the German Air Force.
I flew my first combat mission on D-Day, June 6.
That moment in history called D-Day will never die. It spelled life to those who were enslaved, a time of greatness to those who battled, a lesson to would-be aggressors. D-Day, climax of many forces, was spearheaded by the United States Air Force.
I saw the most amazing sight I can ever remember, and I still vividly remember it today, the lines of ships. It looked like there were so many, there was like 7,000 ships over that period of weeks or months, back and forth from England to Normandy beaches. It looked like you could step from one ship to the next on D-Day. It was just a remarkable sight.
We had a lot in our favor. We had mastery of the air. We achieved complete surprise. And we had guys with guts and faith and freedom on our side.
Our main assignment was to escort the bombers, the B-17s and B-24s, on their missions to Europe, their bombing missions. And we had external fuel tanks, so we could take them all the way to Berlin and back. And so we had a number of lengthy missions. My average mission was 4 hours long. We would take off probably 2 hours after the bombers did, and we would catch them before they reached landfall in Europe, and then escort them to their target and back. It was very tough for those guys. I admire them, what they went through.
Get that one at 3. He's going out. Stand down. Check the chute.
A couple of scraps we got into. The anti-aircraft was fairly obvious, and we could skirt around it. The bombers could not. They had to fly right through it, and it was devastating to them. And I saw horrible happenings of planes falling apart and parachutes, and yeah, it was terrible. We did a few targets of opportunity missions and strafing missions of airfields. Did a little bit of dive bombing. We weren't very good at it. We weren't really trained to do it, but we carried bombs and did a little of that. And then we would do what was called targets of opportunity, where we would go down on the deck and we would shoot at anything that was moving. That's what we were supposed to do. We had a couple of the buzz bombs that were flying, the German buzz bombs that were flying over to London.
V1, the flying bomb, the robot bomb, the buzz bomb. You can sit back in your seat in this theater and see and hear V1, but you cannot imagine how London suffered.
We used to look out the window and when we'd hear them coming. One landed not too far from our base. Fortunately, it didn't do any damage. We lost 20% of our pilots during the course of the war. My 52nd mission over there, I was shot down by anti-aircraft. October 7th, 1944. And it was a day like today. And we took off later in the afternoon to head back to England. I saw tracers coming up off my flight leader's tail, and I started doing evasive action and radioed to him, and he kept flying straight ahead. And they missed him and hit me, and knocked out my hydraulic system, and then the right rudder pedal cable went limp. And the first thing I said to myself was, how am I going to land this airplane when I get back to England? And then about a minute later, the stick, which controls the elevators and the ailerons, it went limp. When that happened, I knew I had to get out of that airplane very quickly. I jettisoned the canopy and stood up and just dove out of the right side of the airplane. And I turned back to make sure I was clear of the airplane and pulled the ripcord and floated down and watched my plane spin down and explode. Sad, brand new P-51. Only probably had about 40 hours on it. I had landed on a sandbar, and I'm in chest deep water. Taking off my parachute harness and all of a sudden I put my foot down a couple of miles off the coast of the land. I could see land to my south. Unhooked the dinghy and inflated it and got in it and paddled to an area that was above water, a couple hundred yards away from where I was. And my flight leader, Vic, he came down, saw what happened, waggled his wings, and he radioed our position, and he headed back to England. I didn't know where I was. I knew it was land, but I didn't know it was an island. And I assumed it was the Netherlands because that's what we were flying over. And there was a wooden fence just below the base of the dike, so I thought I would prop the dinghy up against that so anybody walking along the road at the top would not see it. I saw two men standing on the road on the top of the dike, and I knew they'd seen me, and so I just walked right up to them. So they took me to a house not very far away, which was occupied by a young couple with an infant child. And I knew I wouldn't be able to stay there very long, but I stayed there the afternoon until it got dark. And they brought a map, showed me where I was, and said the British were on the other side of the island. And I knew that wasn't true, but I had no way of proving it. One man took me out and pointed me down a road and told me to walk that way. And so he bid me farewell, and I walked all night long, well, not all night long, for a few hours, and came to a town, and we were trained never to go in a town at night. And so I turned around and came out and found a house with a haystack across the street with a wagon over the haystack, and I went underneath there and went to sleep. In the morning, I was awakened by a horse whinnying in the pasture nearby, and I looked around and saw nobody, so I walked across the street and around the back of the house and knocked on the door, and a young boy came to the door, and we had a language card And he didn't understand, so he went and got his father, who came to the door. He had shaving cream on his face. It was early morning, and I showed him the language card, and he invited me in. His wife was in the kitchen making breakfast, I guess, and they took me up to the second floor of this house and brought me some food, and I cleaned up a little bit, shaved, felt pretty good. Sometime later in the day, some man came with a piece of paper typewritten in English saying that I had made contact with the Dutch underground and that I would be taking a bicycle ride that evening to someplace. So all I had was a wristwatch, and I had kept that and my dog tags. And they took my uniform and gave me civilian clothes, and we got on a pair of bicycles. I was not to say anything to anybody, and rode for, I don't know, a good hour or so, I think, and came upon a house in a farm area and motioned me to stop, and by a tree by the back entrance, this man came out who was nicely dressed and walked up to me and in perfect English said, "How do you do? My name is Willem de Boer. I'm a police officer and a member of the Dutch Underground." And that I had come upon this family, the Vondermas family, where I would be staying. They had a young boy, 5-year-old boy, and that's why we got there at dark, because the boy had gone to bed. They took me inside and I met Marie and Isaac Vondermas, and this was their farm. It was like the second or third generation on the island of North Beveland. I had a room up on the second floor with skylights. It was perfect. Mrs. Vondermas, Marie, would bring food to me during the day. She didn't speak English, I didn't speak Dutch. But Willem de Boer came over most every night, and we would sit around and talk about the United States and the Netherlands and what was happening in the war. A couple times we listened to the BBC on the radio. So I stayed there for 3 weeks, and I never saw the little boy, Hybe. I was told he saw me once when I came down the stairs, look out the window as the Germans were evacuating themselves. They came across the Vondermas farm because they had a well there. The house they used just one entrance, and they didn't use the living room. They had a kind of a kitchen dining area and one entrance they used, and it had a bathroom right off of it. And that's the bathroom I would use every night when I would come downstairs after supper. And we had a signal. If anything should come up and I was in the bathroom, someone would give me the signal, and I was to get out of there as fast as I could and go right upstairs. Well, I'm in there one evening, and it's dark. And Willem was there, fortunately, and a knock comes on the door. They both go to the door, and it's 3 German officers. And so they immediately, one of them goes outside, closes the door, find out what they want, and the other guy gives me the signal, and I quickly pull up my pants and up I go. Fortunately, they weren't looking for me, they were looking for a place to sleep. Well, I guess you don't say no. They had a spare bedroom right under the room where I was staying, and I could hear them talking before they went to sleep. They didn't become suspicious. I lay there silently. I didn't sleep a wink, I'm sure, that night at all. And they left in the morning, so it was uneventful, but it was close. One day, without any notice, 2 men came to me and said, "We're leaving," and I was leaving. And I didn't really get a chance to say goodbye to Mrs. Vondermas or Mr. Vondermas. We went on a boat across to the next island, South Beveland, and then walked into a village. Canadian reconnaissance group had moved into that area. And I just stood along the side of the road, and when they came up, I walked out and identified myself, and they looked at me and said, "We find you guys in the oddest places." And so I stayed with them for a day, And then they drove me back to Antwerp, where I was interrogated by the Canadians, given a physical, given a Canadian uniform without any identification on it, driven to Brussels. I was able to send a cablegram to my mother. She had received the typical missing in action telegram from the War Department a few days before I was liberated, because they wait 2 to 3 weeks after you're missing. And that's all she knew, of course. And then I flew to Paris, flew back to my base, and because I was classified as an evadee, my missions were over with. My tour was finished in the 8th Air Force. In case you get shot down again, the Germans were very good at interrogating. They had all the newspaper clippings. There was a clipping in the Cleveland Plain Dealer about my being missing in action. So the Germans knew about that. And of course the family that helped me, they'd be in real jeopardy. And I was sent back to the United States in November of '44, on Thanksgiving Day actually. Wound up in Abilene, Texas as an instructor pilot in P-47 Thunderbolts, which I'd never even sat in before. And then the war ended.
To the victor belongs the spoils. That's what they say. Well, what are the spoils? Only this. A chance to build a free world, better than before. Maybe the last chance. Remember that.
16 years later, I'm married, have kids, live here in Shaker, I'm working in Shaker. I get a phone call from my wife, and she says, "Can you come home?" I said, "Sure." So I came right home, and young Hybe Vondermas, who is now a 21-year-old, had been in this country for a couple of months. We had corresponded back and forth with the Vondermas family, and we'd sent a picture, and so there was Hybe, this 21-year-old kid, spoke beautiful English, and he stayed with us for 3 or 4 days. We became very, very close friends, and I've been back there 3 or 4 times. He's been over here a couple of times. It was a very emotional meeting when I went back the first time, because Isaac had died, but Marie was there, and had 2 great kids. I liked the military, but I didn't want to stay in. I had piled up 3 airplanes and walked away from all 3 without a scratch, and feel very lucky, and did what I wanted to do and met some wonderful people. Hate wars. Wars are terrible things, and it's too bad we can't solve our problems diplomatically instead of having to go to war.
Hi, Ben here from the World War II Veterans History Project, and thank you for watching this episode of World War II as they saw it. If you enjoyed the video, click the like button down below and consider subscribing to our channel for more historical content. And be sure to click the notification bell to stay up to date on all our latest videos. If you'd like to support the efforts of the World War II Veterans History Project and keep this series going, please consider supporting us on Patreon for as little as $1 a month. The link is in the description below. Thanks again for watching this episode of World War II as they saw it. We hope to see you again soon.